Context: Comicsgate and the double standard of truth. When talking about Comicsgate with Comicsgaters, there's a game that has to be played. When they experience a victory or feel in some way vindicated, they're a group, a movement, an identity unique and of itself. Not quite an organization, but parsing that level of subtlety is splitting hairs. However, when you're the least bit critical of one of them, the group as a whole, or you point to a problem that needs to be solved, like, say, just hypothetically, their ongoing refusal to remove or block white nationalists from the movement, suddenly it's no longer a movement or identity, but just a bunch of boys being boys. These semantics games put them in an intellectually disingenuous place, where they cannot be questioned or thoughtfully examined in any honest or meaningful way. It's never my movement, my fault, or my responsibilities. They want the benefits, to reap the rewards, but face none of the risk or downsides associated with behavior that they are all either complicit with or actively involved in. Yet if their responses to my first video are to be believed, they still feel the need to take it upon themselves to be offended enough to respond and correct me. Because, well, you know how silly, uninformed, and generally irrational women can be, am I right? Yeah, about that. If the problem was only culpability, you could at least try to have the conversation. But that's where it gets sticky. Since these are guys who spend their lives arguing on social media, they've resorted to some of the dirtiest tactics you can possibly use in an effort to try to win the debate. Namely, Orwellian language games, where the meaning of words can change, or in some cases, disappear entirely. For example, they're all very confused, and some will argue that words like harassment need to be defined. They magically can't recall what the word means. Seriously, I heard that twice yesterday from two different Comicsgaters, one of whom is well known. But, more nefariously, they apply some incredibly lopsided definitions to words like truth, proof, and evidence, in a premeditated effort to muddy the discourse and absolve themselves further of responsibility, assuming their transparent games around the culpability argument don't hold. These words mean very different things to Comicsgaters, depending whether you agree with their politics or not. Applied in a way that is neither objective nor consistent, these standards exist for the sole purpose of excusing some incredibly bad and often illegal behavior online. When someone they like is threatened, their beliefs are such that they drop everything in order to come to the side of their comrade in distress. Nothing is ever asked of the victims of harassment in their circles. Like Ethan Van Sciver, who receives threats and harassment from other groups of toxic fans on a regular basis. In my dealings with Ethan, he's been the perfect gentleman, kind, considerate, understanding, so I don't want to insult him. But the fact remains that he's never been asked to do things like publish threat data, detailing some of the more virulent harassment which he receives, in his words, every day. Never once has any such proof ever been posted, because asking a victim of harassment to prove themselves innocent during a time of crisis is morally repulsive. The Comicsgaters, at least, are considered enough to be reasonable when it's one of their own. Even if Ethan isn't directly affiliated with Comicsgate himself, he's certainly someone they like, admire, and look up to. It should also go without saying that Ethan Van Sciver is not a woman. Nowhere is this misogynistic double standard more pronounced as when the Boys Club of Comicsgate implements a harassment campaign that goes too far. The case of Heather Antos is the highest profile of them, but there are plenty of others. In these cases, a victim of harassment, doxing, or stalking will let a limited number of people know what happened, as is natural in these situations. Whom she tells it to, be it only close family members, friends, or the entire world via Twitter, is at her discretion. That's her right. But when the Comicsgaters catch wind of it, these high and mighty warriors for truth come out. Then, calls to spread threat data spread. Threat data can include police reports, details of a crime committed, or any other specifics on a threat received. Asking for this kind of proof is a highly problematic approach, because, oftentimes, publishing it can be more dangerous than the original crime itself, especially given the nature of these often credible threats. When the victim, who again is generally a woman, refuses to comply with these unreasonable demands, she is defamed and harassed further. This is true whether she has made a public statement on the subject or not. It does not matter to them. Claims about her credibility will be made. In some cases, her very personhood and professional standing will be challenged. Then the whole shit show becomes not about the crime, which was likely spawned by the group itself, but rather about how bad the victim is for refusing to comply with their simple and reasonable demands, for her to put herself and her family in even worse jeopardy than they're already in. Seriously, what's wrong with that, right? The gaslighting extravaganza that ensues is as relentless as it is harmful. If we're going to look at this objectively, we can't ignore the standard of abject, deplorable behavior and compounded harassment in the Comicsgate movement, especially now, since it's no longer directed solely at creators and journalists. Join us next time as we begin to talk about content, substance, the generational divide in comic book readership, and problematic tropes. See you then!